place names on the map of this region, they smolder like embers of old campfires. The Little Miami River, the Great Miami River, Miami County, the Maumee River. This place, that's something that my grandfather said in 1991. He was talking to Turtle Berkey Bile. He was talking to Rachel Hall. He was talking to Tina Holen and some of their parents. He said that he had heard that from a historian named Walter Havinghurst, who wrote the history of this university in the 1950s, when I think that statement was true. The only connection between people was a name, and it was just an ember. Thinking a lot about embers and fires this weekend. I don't think that Walter Havinghurst knew about Miami County, Indiana. I don't think he knew about Miami County, Kansas. I don't know if he knew about Myaamia, Oklahoma. For the settlers here, it was the name. Not a lot of heat with those embers. But in the last 50 years, people blew. And it took a long time. Well, it took 50 years, but here we are. And we benefit from the heat and the warmth and the light of that fire. And it wasn't always like this. So with the benefit of standing here now, I want to look back to think about what is worth celebrating. I'm a historian, so I'm going to go way back. Long time in the history of this university and not so long in the history of the Myaamiaki. I want to talk about land. Something I don't know we talk much about in the context of the relationship. The founding of this university. I'm going to talk about what we think of as the origin story 50 years ago in 1972. What was actually happening in 1972. And that's all a setup for us here in this room, which is, I think, a story of creating space on this landscape for Myaamia people, and we call that self-determination. So I want to plant that. All American universities were built on native land. What does that mean for us here? Well, the short answer is that the Miami tribe, the Miami Nation, was an unwilling benefactor of Miami University. The primary source of revenue of old Miami from 1809 to 1873 was rent from this land. Not tuition, there was no state assistance. It was rent from the land. The ink was barely dry on the Constitution of the United States in the 1780s when the United States embarked on a war of conquest to gain this land, called the Myaamiaki Wars, the wars against the Americans. If you're from this region and you've ever heard of these wars, you might call them the Northwest Indian Wars or Little Turtles War. Took a lot of blood and treasure to wrest this territory from the indigenous owners, ending with the Treaty of Greenville in 1795, just north of here. On that day, the Miami signers relinquished their ownership of the place where we're sitting right now. So the Miami and Shawnee people relinquished their land to the United States federal government, who flipped it to the Board of Trustees of Miami University, who own it today. Very simple chain of title. And I'm interested in chain of titles if you were here earlier. So Miami University was initially not an institute of learning, but a land company, more or less. They owned, the board of trustees owned 36 square miles called a township. It's called the College Township, and this is what it looks like on the land on a modern map. It was called the College Township until it became Oxford Township. And they would rent that out. They began selling land in 1810 at the Hamilton, Ohio courthouse. People would pay for their area of land, and then they were required to pay 6% of the value of that land to the Board of Trustees. It was collected from a collector, which was a position on the University Board of Trustees. They had a secretary, a president, treasurer, and a collector who wandered around collecting. This is the first one. This guy, Alexander King, owes every year $1.07 mills. Tiny little cents, I guess. Less than cents. Revenues increased. As I said, most revenues of Old Miami are from the land until the school closed and reopened with state assistance as a result of the Civil War, and so in the late 19th century. Miami University made, in the 18 teens, between $1,000 and $2,000 a year from the land, these 36 square miles, the Oxford College Township. 23,000 acres is what that township is, more or less. So they earned, eventually, once everywhere was settled within the township, the price rose to kind of $5,000 to $7,000 every year was what they received for 23,000 acres. In the 18 teens, the Miami Nation had relinquished 23 million acres, more than 23,000 acres, and received a similar amount of money every year. About the same money every year for 23 million acres versus 23,000 acres. 23 million acres is about the size of Indiana. So the land was plundered, and I'll return to that later. The land was then privatized beginning in 1959. Initially, the land was going to be, according to the law, the General Assembly of the great state of Ohio had decided that the land would be reappraised every 15 years to allow land values to increase and therefore revenues to increase. Quickly thereafter, for whatever reason, the General Assembly decided they wouldn't reappraise the land, and people had entered leases to hold their land for 99 years, beginning in 1810. The land was not reappraised, so you were paying the same rent to the university in 1810 as you did in 1910 or 1909, technically. And then those leases were renewed for 99 years more. What that meant was that as land values increased here, people continued to pay the same very suppressed prices, which meant that the university was not receiving much money from the land anymore compared to the annual budget of the university. The budget of the university is much more than $7,500, which was kind of the max amount that the university could acquire. So they lobbied for legislation and began privatizing. People could buy out of leasing their land every year. They didn't have to go to the window and pay $1 or $2 every year. They could buy out for $25. And so most of the land has now been totally privatized when it didn't benefit the university. The land built Harrison Hall, called Old Main. It helped build Stoddard and Elliott Halls. Not only literally the bricks from the land, but the money to hire brick makers. So both the land physically and the money from the land. When Alumni Library was built in the 1900s, a new library called Alumni Library because alumni donated to help build it. Andrew Carnegie, who is not an alumni, but loved libraries, paid for a lot of it, and land rent paid for Alumni Library as well, partially. This is one example of someone's land rent in 1955. Big old boxes in the university archives tracking people's land. That's one story. Another story that we point to is 1972, when Forrest Olds, from our perspective in Oxford, mysteriously popped into campus. I don't know if he was a mysterious man, but that's kind of the way that we talk about it. This is a photo of John Ruthven, a wildlife painter who I think the only humans that he ever depicted were native people. He did research, consulting with Boy Scouts to determine what native people might have looked like, and came up with this, which is Miami Indian 1. And from this is so important to the relationship, I think, because this becomes the logo, the brand identity of the university for a long time. And this is what people point to as a moment when Miami Indians said, this is us, for that moment. In 1972, Chief Olds didn't pop in so mysteriously, although it wasn't a planned visit. I want to think about the context of the 1970s, first from the university and then from Oklahoma. Miami University was dealing with the Vietnam War, as all of the United States and other places in the world, including Vietnam, were. The Rowan Hall takeover in 1970 was still a hot topic on campus. Rowan Hall is just down the stairs. This picture would have been taken just down these stairs when the Rowan Hall, the ROTC building, was taken over by students, ending in tear gas in the spring of 1970. Soon thereafter, Kent State, 4 students shot dead at Kent State, and like other universities, Miami University closed. Hundreds of universities closed. At the same time, there were committees to diversify Miami University, which are ongoing. Committees to diversify campus, particularly African-American faculty and students. I mean, the first tenure-track African-American faculty member, Heenan Wilkins, is 1968. First African-American staff member at this university is 1969. So they create ad hoc committees to investigate how we can improve campus, as they continue to do. And one of those was brought to the president's desk in 1972. It was a student government resolution to change the race-based mascot of the nickname of the athletic teams, which began with an R. And so the president created an ad hoc committee to investigate the use of that nickname. Appointed 7 people. One was a former Hiawabop dancer, danced around at half times. Outfit was created by predominantly Boy Scouts. And he said, "It was with great excitement and trepidation," he recalled in 1993, "that I telephoned him that same day to discuss the relationship and whether to," it's quite a dichotomy, "to continue our warm bond of historical heritage or to terminate it forever." Those are the options. Cold embers. That's what he remembered in 1993. He had to call some agency. I guess he got in touch with the Bureau of Indian Affairs because he didn't know that there was a Miami tribe. I mean, he remembered that. And they told him, yeah, there's folks out in Oklahoma. Okay. He called him. "In what ways is our university's nickname harmful to you?" they wrote to Chief Olds. And he began, literally first line, "First of all, I am not a militant, and therefore my ideas may not coincide with militant thinking," which is interesting. They weren't asking about that, I don't think. So what's the context? I think the context that both the university and the nation are thinking through is activism. In the case of Oklahoma and Indian country, that's called red power often. And he's saying, that ain't me. University folks, as well as those in Oklahoma, knew about the 1960s Northwest fish-ins, the takeover of Alcatraz that was nightly news, 1969, 1970, using the national media. While they were corresponding in the summer of 1972, there was a convoy, the Trail of Broken Treaties, that was coming across the nation, coming to Washington, D.C., that ended up taking over the Bureau of Indian Affairs building, which is the photo on the left. And so when I think about the siege at Wounded Knee in 1973, which was also front page news here and there, when I think about Red Power and the American Indian movement, I think of red berets and jean jackets and rifles, black braids. And those aren't the image, that's not the image of Chief Olds that I have gathered from the record. Think about overalls, he's a farmer. Think about nice suits, beaded bolo, walking cane. First of all, I am not a militant. Chief Olds was a member of the National Congress of American Indians. And the National Congress of the American Indians responded to Red Power with a banner on their headquarters that said, "Indians don't demonstrate." I want to connect the dots a little bit differently. And I think what's important in this context, come back to land, is the Indian Claims Commission, which is a procedure to investigate historical injustices and make financial restitution for unjust treaties. Begins in the 1940s and ends in the 1970s. Long process. The Myaami tribe is actively involved in this process throughout, bringing claims against the federal government for past injustices, treaty injustices, legal wrongs. Olds was working with, Chief Old was working with Chief Forrest Olds, if I haven't said his first name, Myaamiaki, called Pud, was working with lawyers from a Chicago law firm, a high-powered law firm. He was traveling to Washington, D.C. somewhat frequently, writing to politicians, not low-level politicians, not universities, but senators. He was being invited to presidential functions. That is not Miami University presidential functions, although there's that too, but United States presidential functions. For example, in 1966, Forrest Olds visited Indiana and Ohio, and he wrote something beautiful. I have a better understanding as to why I now have a better understanding as to why my ancestors were so reluctant to leave this place of fertile land and beautiful streams. Chief Olds was an activist, maybe, for his nation at least. Treaty of 1805, as one example, the United States government agreed that the Miami Nation had received just 1.3% of fair market value at that time, and that docket was awarded in 1969. 1809, think about the founding of this university in 1809. We're 13 miles from the international border. You can ride your bike to Treaty Line Road from here. As far west as you can go until you're in Myaamiaki. Treaty of 1809, the U.S. agreed the Miami Nation had received 1.1 and 0.6% of fair market value. That was also awarded in 1969. So what is Chief Olds doing in the early 1970s? He's writing very pointed letters to his politicians. Dear Senator Harris, Fred Harris, a Democrat from Oklahoma, thanks very much for introducing bill for distribution of judgment funds awarded to Miamis. But this is not what we asked for, and the business committee rejected same. If you would try for what we asked, okay. If not, forget it. Weeyaakiteeheeyankwi. When the university asked him, what do you think about our name, our nickname? He said, I would be very reluctant to make a recommendation or suggestion. After all, I'm not a militant. That letter is often forgotten in favor of the resolution that the university wrote and sent to Oklahoma, and then the tribe signed. That said they actually were proud of the nickname. The university was very happy that it had succeeded in the 1970s. They wrote to their alumni, look at how great we're doing. Scholarships for Native students were made possible because of our taking a positive view of a particular situation, as compared with, another dichotomy, cutting our relationships with the American Indian and letting that race drift. In 1966, when Chief Olds drove to an interview, the journalist asked, "Do you know how to drive a car?" And that's reported in the Myaamia, Oklahoma newspaper. And we think he drove a 1960s Ford Fairlane. I talked to Second Chief Olds about this. Dustin, you said something beautiful, which is a true gem. I think you told me, and I'll try to quote it. It was one of those cars that's 30 feet long and drives like a dream. So what is activism? What is a relationship? We use the term relationship a lot. Let me put it to you this way. Two conservative institutions, I think it's fair to say, a nation and an American college. One built on the other one's land, meeting in the context of a race-based nickname, develop a radically innovative relationship that apparently other institutions cannot replicate. After I said that, I thought, boy, I should have an answer for how it was actually done. I'll leave that to Kara. But think about those embers. 1974, 1975, Chief Floyd Leonard visits. 1983, the Leonards, home base in Oxford. 91, the first students who prepare the ground. There's a spark now. It's getting a little bit warmer. Myaamia students are here for the first time in 1991. 1809 to 1991. Sovereignty, 1996. Now there's some heat. Be it resolved that the Myaami tribe can no longer support the use of the nickname and suggest that the Board of Trustees of Miami University discontinue it and other Indian-related names. Before, the 1972 resolution said, "May this nickname be blessed as long as the wind shall blow." And I'm struck by, I want to highlight that the nation in 1996 said, "May this relationship be blessed as long as the wind shall blow." The beginning of the Red Hawks era. A lot of people at the university didn't understand that the relationship actually was launched, gained heat, more people surrounding that fire, more faces basking in the glow after the nickname was changed. I think I'll end largely with this, which is a meeting that was recounted last night and has been recounted in an interview before that. Julie Olds came to Oxford in November of 2000. There in the room was Reed Anderson, Bobby Burke, people in this room, Darrell Baldwin, Joe Leonard, who has been in every single Myaamia function since the 1980s, as far as I can tell, Murtis Powell, and I think Jim Hamill was there as well. People from the tribe and the university, and both. Julie Olds said, and I'm going to quote here, not from last night, but from a previous interview, "I remember being so nervous and fumbling through and presenting what we wanted to do. We had come so far, and now for our hopes and dreams to ever really be possible, we believed that we needed to establish an understanding with a university. I remember being very afraid." She said, "If we're not going to do this revitalization thing here, we'll do it somewhere else." Murtis Powell, whose personality jumps off the page, said, "It's going to happen here." And Bobby Burke, who wrote everything down, has notes from that day, and that's why I know it's November 30th, and she wrote, "Going to happen here." It's corroborated, believe me. But it's still a relationship sometimes is a grasping type of thing. There are many sticky points: salary, title, name of this thing Daryl is to direct. That's what Murders Powell said in internal documents. Daryl Baldwin revising kind of a mission statement. He was talking about the creation and staffing of we'll change the following when we decide on a name center, Institute of Myaami Indian Culture to be housed at Miami University. I want to highlight Reed Anderson and his memory because it's so poignant and I think it's worth saying. Myaamiaki, and he said Myaamiaki, not Miami people. He said Myaamiaki were the recipient. The main purpose of all this was not to create a huge body of academic research, but to do research in an applied way that would benefit the Miami nation. It wasn't a hard sell. Maybe there's heat already. But it took a lot of explaining for people to think, well, how is this going to work? We've never seen anything like this. I think that's what we're talking about this weekend. Continue to talk about it. Where have we been and how did we get here and where are we going? My colleague Kara Strauss will take over for me.
Myaamiaki te peweni alaka kokio hanungi kakikwe mahkunza kwawins maane. Hi everyone, I'm Kara Strauss. It's good to see you all today. And I think it's fitting that I'm taking over in 2001 because when I talk about this relationship, and I do quite frequently these days, I tell people that it's unique in the country, that we don't know of any other university that has a relationship like this one. And when I'm asked what makes it unique, it's that a university has created space for a tribal nation to do their own work for the benefit of their people. And that starts in 2001 with the creation of the Myaamia Project, which we all know today as the Myaamia Center. And we see a little bit younger Daryl Baldwin in his very first office in 2001. And he is the first Myaamia person to be a staff member here at Miami to do this work. The second staff person, the first executive director of the Myaamia Center. I apologize for my mistake, but this is work that's being driven by the tribe for the tribe, and that's the thing that changes in 2001. So we've had students here since 1991. You saw a picture of our first 3 students, but in the early years, there was not a whole lot here for them outside of financial aid. And that begins to change in 2003 when the Myaamia Heritage courses begin. And we start to get our students all together in the same place so that they can engage with their Myaamia heritage, learn their language, learn their history, and start to build a strong community here on campus. One of the things that's really interesting about this relationship when we think of the timeline is, the relationship starts in the 70s. The Myaamia Project begins in 2001. There was no formal documentation that outlined this relationship until 2006. It was really allowed to build, to grow, and to kind of figure out at least a little bit of what it was before we put legalistic terms to it. And so in 2006, the Memorandum of Understanding was signed, which outlines the relationship and the responsibilities that each side of that relationship hold. And we still function under that Memorandum of Understanding today, and then add memorandums of agreement when we have new projects and procedures that we need to outline. In 2013, the Myaamia Project transitions to the Myaamia Center. And when we think about the way things work on a university campus, what this allowed was to make the center more permanent, to give it status on campus. And a lot of times we talk about that the center was really under the radar up until this point, and that this kind of made the Myaamia Center come out from under the radar to be something that was, on campus, people knew more about it, wanted to engage with the work of the Myaamia Center. In 2017, we released the Myaamia Heritage logo, talking about these embers that had built into a fire. And as this logo was being created, we went through a whole lot of iterations of what it could be. Pages and pages of iconography and graphics. And fire was the thing that especially Julie Olds kept coming back to, that we have built a fire here and that we need to remember that we have to tend this fire for it to move forward. And so that's how we came to the Myaamia Heritage logo, which of course is inspired by Myaamia ribbon work. And it's that red dot at the center that represents fire and is a visual reminder to both sides of this relationship that we have to tend this fire in order for it to move forward. And of course, today we see the Myaamia Heritage logo all across campus, on merchandise, on marketing, in athletics, which was a whole process in and of itself based on this history that we've heard about today. But each one of these relationships continues to be strengthened through the work that we do together. So up until now, we've talked about the history, and we could only touch on a few of those pieces. There's so many other parts to this history that we could not cover. But we've hit a lot of very important milestones recently. In 2021, it was the 30th anniversary of the Myaamia Heritage Award. It was the 20th anniversary of the Myaamia Center. And of course, this year is the 50th anniversary of this relationship. And so it feels like things have just continued to grow, continued to evolve, and they're really coming to a very unique culmination at this point. Of course, we know it's going to continue to move forward, but that's why we want to take this time to really think back on our history so that we can truly celebrate everything that has happened in the last 50 years. So what has this looked like for the Myaamia Center? Daryl arrived in 2001, one employee. Today we have 17 full and part-time staff members. We have 9 faculty affiliates, a graduate fellow, a faculty fellow. We have 6 graduate assistants. This work has grown significantly in the past 20 years, and it just continues to grow as we move forward. When we think about the projects that the Myaamia Center has done, or really the projects that have happened as part of this relationship more broadly, in the early years, it involved field schools. Miami would take usually classes or groups of students to Miami, Oklahoma, so that they could learn from the tribe, and oftentimes had a project that they would do at the end. And some of these were super, super important to the community, including bringing software that eventually turned into the newspaper that we all continue to read today. However, the difference is, at that point, it was still Miami University primarily driving this work. It was Miami University students doing these projects. Whereas today, you've already heard presentations about Achim Wachiangonje, about the ethnobotanical database. We'll hear more about ILDA after this. And these are projects that are done truly in relationship, right? There's Myaamia people, there's faculty, there's staff that all come together, and that work is driven by the tribe to benefit the tribe. Here's a photo of our Myaamia students from this year. We have 38 Myaamia students here at Miami University. This semester, our largest number ever, and we expect that to grow again next year. Things have continued to grow on the student front as well. We graduated our 100th alumni in May. We have exactly 100 Myaamia alumni of the Myaamia Heritage Program. We had our largest incoming cohort, as well as our largest total student body. Our students aren't just coming here in higher numbers, they have higher academic attainment. So prior to 2003, when the Myaamia Heritage course began, our students had a 56% graduation rate, higher than the national average for Native American students, actually by a lot. But today, since the creation of the Myaamia Heritage classes, we have a 92% graduation rate for our students. They are being more academically successful because of the work that we're doing, because of the support that we're providing them to make sure that we're not just bringing them here with financial aid, but that we're ensuring that they can be successful. When I first made this graph, I think 2 years ago, it kind of blew my mind. It's a graph of our student enrollment over time since 1991 to now. And I can't say any more, right? Besides that, our student numbers have just continued to grow. it's possible we'll plateau at some point when we reach, the highest number of Myaamia college-age students who want to come here. But I expect our number to be even bigger for next year as well. And I showed you the nice picture, but that's not the way I think of them. I think of them more like they're presented in these photos. These are taken at our retreat, which we have every year, the very first week of class, where we try to gather them together so that we can start off the year as a community and everyone can make sure that they know each other and feel like we're creating that Myaamia community here at Miami. This relationship, I've explained to you that it's grown. I've been able to put data behind that growth. However, there are certain times in which you really feel the growth of the relationship, and it's hard to put into words what that growth feels like. But I think one of those times was this past October when we had an event that commemorated the 175th anniversary of removal from our homelands. And Miami University drove the planning of an event that would remember that event, remember its connection to Miami University. And I don't believe that event would have been possible a decade ago. The relationship was not strong enough at that point. Miami didn't fully understand their history and their connection to Myaamia history well enough at that point. But we're there today, and we were able to have a lovely event, sad, but lovely, where everyone was able to join together in remembrance of this tragic event in Myaamia history. So this year in 2022, we are celebrating this history, this 50 years of history that we've just talked with you about today. Weeyaakiteeheeyankwi, Neepwaantiiyankwi. We celebrate learning from each other. So how are we doing that? One of the ways is by being here today. We had a kickoff event in Myaama, Oklahoma, which unfortunately was not as large as we had hoped, but it was still a great event for our Myaamia community. We're having the largest Myaamiaki conference ever. Thank you all for being here today. We're also planning for a week-long celebration in November 7th through the 13th, so I hope many of you will join us for that. There will be a variety of events that happen that week. We're going to have a big kickoff event that will involve the entire campus community. There will be football and hockey games, presentations, student life events. Campus services does dining hall events and those types of things. And so if you were able to come for 1 week, come for this week, and you'll kind of get to see a little bit of everything. We also have a couple of educational initiatives, a docu-series, a book that you got a little bit of a preview today from Cam Shriver. And so we'll be putting those out to the community as well. We also have a commemorative blanket. There's an example of it in the back, which is actually on sale at the Miami University bookstore, which is just across the street in Shriver, if any of you are interested. This blanket is a reminder of the coming together of these two relationships. The two turtles on there, one representing the community symbol and the tribe, the other the Myaamia heritage turtle. Again, a reminder of this relationship. And one of the inspirations for this was Mahkunzakwa's wearing blanket, which was on exhibit here. In 2020, unfortunately, people didn't get to see it, but there is an online version of that exhibit, so I hope many of you get to explore. So I will end with this photo, which I often end with, because as I told you, this relationship is often hard to put into words. It's more a feeling. It's people getting together, right? And it's not the signing of documents, which we have many photos of people signing documents. But to me, instead, it's getting down on the floor to play games together, right? This is what exemplifies this relationship. And so when Miami University and the Miami tribe are able to get together to learn from each other, that's when we're best able to feel the warmth of the fire that has been tended over the last 50 years. So missionewe to many folks across campus who have been integral to this relationship, as well as to the planning of the 50th anniversary program that's going to happen through the rest of 2022. So missionewe.